in the quiet streets of Poughkeepsie, New York. A shadow was slowly spreading, a shadow that no one could yet see, but that would soon shake the community to its core. Between 1996 and 1998, several young women vanished without a trace. They were mostly small-built, often traveling alone, and some worked as sex workers, navigating a world fraught with danger yet largely ignored by the public eye. At first glance, their disappearances might have seemed unconnected, isolated incidents in a city where daily life continued with little interruption. But for those paying close attention, a pattern was beginning to emerge, a series of absences too persistent and too peculiar to ignore. Families were the first to notice. Mothers, sisters, and friends reported loved ones missing, only to be met with polite reassurances from authorities that the individuals might have simply moved on or gotten caught up in personal difficulties. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. With each passing day, the anxiety in homes across the city grew, mingling with an unspoken fear among the women who still walked the streets. Something felt off, yet no one had proof. No one could say exactly what had gone wrong. Meanwhile, the police began compiling reports, connecting dots that were invisible to the general public. They noticed that many of the missing women shared common traits: similar physical build, overlapping social circles, and a presence in the downtown areas of Poughkeepsie. The realization that these cases might be linked sparked both intrigue and concern within law enforcement. Detectives began to dig deeper, interviewing acquaintances, canvassing neighborhoods, and tracking every lead, no matter how small. Amid the uncertainty and mounting tension, the community was forced to confront a chilling truth. Danger can lurk in the most familiar places, and appearances can be deceiving. Ordinary streets and unassuming neighborhoods could conceal threats hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The missing women were not just statistics. They were human lives, each with dreams, families, and stories abruptly interrupted. This story is not just about the disappearances. It is about the investigation, the tireless work of law enforcement, and the resilience of a community struggling to understand a nightmare that unfolded quietly, yet relentlessly. As we explore this case, we will uncover the twists and turns that led authorities from initial confusion to a breakthrough, revealing a shocking reality that few could have imagined. Before we dive further into the investigation and the events that shook Poughkeepsie, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. By joining our community, you will stay updated on this story and countless other true crime mysteries that reveal the complexities of human behavior and the courage of those seeking justice. Trust me, you won't to miss what comes next. The quiet city streets of Poughkeepsie were about to tell a story that would captivate, horrify, and ultimately shed light on the dark corners of society. And as we step deeper into this investigation, remember, every detail matters, every clue could be the turning point, and every life lost is a reminder of the vigilance needed to protect the vulnerable. As the disappearances continued, the police found themselves navigating a labyrinth of uncertainty, one in which every lead seemed promising at first but ultimately led to dead ends, leaving the investigation suspended in a fog of ambiguity. Unlike typical criminal cases where the presence of a crime scene offers tangible evidence and immediate direction, here there was none. No bodies had been discovered, no traces of violence had been found, and no witnesses had come forward with definitive information. It was as if the women had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only concerned families and a growing sense of dread in the streets they once walked freely. The absence of a physical crime scene was more than a procedural hurdle. It was a psychological weight, casting a shadow over the investigators' ability to construct a clear picture of what had occurred, and every step forward seemed to rely more on intuition than hard facts. Complicating matters further was the fluidity of potential suspects. The transient nature of Poughkeepsie's population meant that individuals drifted in and out of the city, leaving fleeting impressions on those who might later be called to testify. One week, a man could be a neighbor. The next, a stranger whose presence was noted only in passing. The detectives faced the daunting task of tracking not just the lives of the missing women, but also the countless individuals who intersected with them. However briefly, all while trying to establish whether these intersections were merely incidental or part of a larger, more sinister pattern. Every suspect brought a fresh wave of hope and frustration, as criminal histories and prior complaints provided context but no certainty. Some were immediately cleared, while others hovered on the periphery of suspicion, their fleeting connections to the missing women tantalizing yet insufficient to justify legal action. It was an exercise in patience and discernment, where one misstep could allow a dangerous individual to slip further into the shadows, continuing to elude justice. Coordination between agencies, though crucial, proved to be a slow-moving mechanism that added layers of complexity to an already convoluted investigation. Local law enforcement, bound by jurisdictional limitations and finite resources, could only pursue certain lines of inquiry, while state authorities offered specialized capabilities but required extensive documentation and formal requests to act. Federal agencies, including the FBI, could provide profiling expertise and access to national databases, yet they operated under strict protocols that often delayed immediate intervention. Each level of authority had its own priorities, processes, and constraints, and the flow of information between them was never as seamless as investigators had hoped. The resulting delays meant that critical connections might be overlooked, leads went cold, and the window for timely intervention narrowed with each passing day. In many, the bureaucracy of interagency coordination became an invisible adversary, slowing the march toward answers while the public and the families of the missing women lived with growing uncertainty and fear. Despite these obstacles, the detectives persevered, piecing together fragments of information from the most unlikely sources. Reports from street workers, local residents, and informal observers offered glimpses of behavior that, when assembled, began to suggest a disturbing pattern. These small pieces of intelligence, seemingly insignificant at first glance, gradually shaped the profile of a potential perpetrator, highlighting tendencies toward violence, manipulation, and a predilection for targeting vulnerable individuals. Yet even as this emerging profile provided a framework, it remained incomplete without the corroborating evidence that a crime scene or recovered bodies could offer. Investigators were forced to balance the urgency of action with the caution demanded by circumstantial evidence, knowing that any misstep could compromise the integrity of the case and, more importantly, the pursuit of justice for the missing women. The pressure from the community and the media compounded the complexity of the investigation. Concerned citizens, neighbors, and family members pressed law enforcement for answers, their voices carrying both fear and frustration. Stories began circulating in local newspapers and on radio broadcasts, painting a picture of a city haunted by invisible threats, where the streets once thought safe were now fraught with anxiety and suspicion. Yet the public's demand for immediate resolution clashed with the methodical pace required to build a case that could withstand scrutiny in court. Every press release had to be carefully crafted, every statement weighed, to ensure that vital details were not inadvertently revealed, potentially alerting the perpetrator or jeopardizing the investigation. In this tense environment, detectives operated under constant scrutiny, their every decision subject to public interpretation, all while laboring under the weight of unanswered questions and the persistent fear that more women could disappear before the case reached a turning point. The investigation's stagnation was not due to inaction but rather the nature of the challenge itself. Without a central crime scene, The police had to reconstruct events from fragments. Sporadic sightings, minor complaints, and patterns of daily life that offered hints but rarely certainty. They mapped the women's routines, identified potential points of contact with suspects, and cross-referenced these details against criminal records, arrest logs, and anonymous tips. Every analysis demanded meticulous attention, as a single overlooked connection could be the difference between solving the mystery and allowing it to deepen. The detectives' work resembled assembling a puzzle without a reference image, where the pieces were irregular, some missing entirely, and the final picture was both disturbing and elusive. It was a painstaking process that tested the limits of patience, skill, and resolve. Through months of painstaking effort, the police slowly began to narrow their focus, synthesizing scattered intelligence into a coherent direction for the investigation. While the path was riddled with dead ends and false leads, each step brought them closer to identifying patterns of predatory behavior, establishing suspect profiles, and uncovering the terrifying reality that the women's disappearances were not isolated incidents but part of a systematic, deliberate series of acts. The journey was grueling, fraught with uncertainty, and marked by the profound challenge of pursuing justice in the absence of the most basic evidence. Yet it laid the foundation for the eventual breakthrough that would expose the horrifying truth hiding in plain sight within Poughkeepsie's streets. Even as the investigation in Poughkeepsie stretched on, one name repeatedly surfaced in the detectives' files, a figure whose presence seemed both ordinary and unsettling in the same breath. Kendall Francois, known to some in the community as Stinky, had long been a fixture on the streets that intersected with the lives of the missing women. His prior record painted a troubling portrait: multiple complaints of violent behavior toward women, a documented assault, and whispers among locals of his unsettling demeanor. It was precisely this pattern that placed him early on the radar of law enforcement. A person of interest who could not be ignored, yet whose outward appearance and cooperative demeanor initially obscured the danger he posed. The detectives, armed with both official reports and informal accounts from the street, knew that vigilance alone would not suffice. They needed evidence, tangible proof of wrongdoing that could withstand the scrutiny of a court. In the beginning, surveillance operations began with careful planning and methodical observation. Teams of officers were assigned to follow his routines, noting his comings and goings, interactions with residents, and any behavior that could link him to the missing women. For weeks, they watched his home at 99 Fulton Avenue, an unassuming two-story house tucked in among other modest residences, its faded green siding belying the darkness within. Despite the hours spent observing, the detectives saw only mundane activity: Francois driving his mother to work, returning to cruise the streets, occasionally engaging with familiar faces in downtown Poughkeepsie. Each movement seemed innocent, each encounter ordinary, and yet the investigators sensed an undercurrent of menace, a hidden layer of behavior not visible to the casual observer, but hinted at in the past complaints and neighborhood whispers. Parallel to surveillance, officers conducted interviews with those who had encountered Francois in varying contexts. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances were approached, their recollections carefully documented. Questions were framed to elicit both factual accounts and subtler impressions of character, seeking to uncover patterns that might indicate culpability. Francois himself was cooperative when initially questioned, offering straightforward answers, appearing calm, and maintaining a level of composure that belied the suspicions swirling around him. To the detectives, his demeanor was both a challenge and a puzzle. Here was a man whose behavior, as reported, was violent and predatory, yet he could present himself in ways that seemed entirely compliant, almost unremarkable. The contrast between his public persona and the warnings from those who knew him created a tension that both frustrated and motivated the investigative team, demanding a careful balance of scrutiny and patience. Despite the diligence of these efforts, tangible evidence remained elusive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with surveillance yielding no actionable proof. Every meeting, every interaction, was meticulously recorded and analyzed, but nothing definitively linked him to the disappearances. Officers tracked his movements, monitored conversations, and even coordinated with undercover operatives. Yet each lead ended in ambiguity. The gap between suspicion and proof became painfully clear, underscoring the inherent difficulty of building a case against someone who, on the surface, appeared cooperative and harmless. Detectives had to wrestle with the frustrating reality that prior allegations, rumors, and behavioral red flags could inform their focus but could not, on their own, justify an arrest or a search. The investigation existed in a liminal space, caught between the necessity of action and the constraints of law, where every decision carried weighty consequences and the margin for error was perilously slim. Within this tense environment, the role of the community and informal networks proved invaluable. Prostitutes who had interacted with Francois, street vendors who noticed patterns in his daily routines, and neighbors who glimpsed his behavior through windows or on sidewalks provided a tapestry of small observations. Each account, seemingly minor on its own, contributed to a larger mosaic that hinted at the reality behind the facade. Detectives began to see emerging consistencies, a tendency to follow certain women, an interest in isolated areas, a comfort with confrontation and intimidation. Still, without a crime scene or direct testimony, these insights remained pieces of a puzzle that could not yet be assembled into a coherent image of guilt. Investigators relied on careful cross-referencing, pattern recognition, and a disciplined methodology to ensure that no lead, however fleeting, was ignored, and no thread went unexamined. Francois' early identification as a potential suspect underscores the paradoxical nature of certain investigations. Someone can appear entirely normal, navigate daily life with superficial normalcy, and yet harbor dangerous and destructive impulses. It also highlights the painstaking patience required in law enforcement, where intuition and prior behavior provide direction but cannot substitute for hard evidence. The detective's strategy demanded a long-term commitment to observation, analysis, and gradual accumulation of corroborating facts, a process that tested both their resolve and their capacity for meticulous attention to detail. Every surveillance session, every interview, every note taken was a step toward understanding a reality that remained hidden beneath layers of routine, facade, and human complexity. Throughout this period, the tension between what was known and what remained unknown created an almost unbearable sense of suspense. Investigators were acutely aware that time could work against them, that any misstep could allow Francois to continue his predatory behavior unchecked. Yet they also knew that premature action could compromise the entire case, potentially alerting him and destroying the chance for a definitive breakthrough. It was a delicate balance, requiring both courage and restraint, as officers moved silently through the streets of Poughkeepsie, observing, documenting, and waiting for the evidence that would finally reveal the truth lurking behind the ordinary exterior of a man who would come to be remembered not for what was visible to the world, but for the horrors hidden within his home and within the shadows of a seemingly quiet city. In the end, these early efforts, though yielding no immediate arrests, laid the crucial groundwork for the eventual unraveling of the case. The surveillance, interviews, and painstaking observation provided law enforcement with the nuanced understanding of Francois' patterns, behaviors, and interactions that would later enable them to connect him definitively to the missing women. This phase of the investigation demonstrated the complex interplay between patience, vigilance, and analytical skill, illustrating that even in the absence of overt evidence, a determined and methodical approach could gradually peel back layers of deception, revealing a truth that had long been hidden in plain sight. By the summer of 1998, nearly 2 years had passed since the first of the young women vanished from the streets of Poughkeepsie, and the city remained tense with a quiet, underlying fear that no one could entirely shake. Families of the missing had grown anxious, their hopes flickering between belief and despair, while law enforcement continued to navigate the labyrinth of leads, tips, and suspicions that had so far failed to produce concrete evidence. Despite months of painstaking surveillance and interviews, Kendall Francois remained an enigma, a man whose prior behavior had raised red flags but who had, until this point, managed to present himself as cooperative and unremarkable, blending into the rhythms of daily life with an unsettling normalcy. Yet the detectives knew that the breakthrough could arrive at any moment, often unexpectedly, and on one chilly morning in August, it did. The event that would finally tip the balance began in the city's familiar downtown streets, where Francois had long cruised, his presence both known and feared by those who spent time there. On this, a young woman, one who had crossed paths with him before, found herself in a situation that would become pivotal to the investigation. Francois approached her under the guise of a familiar interaction, yet the encounter quickly escalated into violence. In a moment that would change the course of the investigation, he attempted to overpower her, hands around her throat in a terrifying display of aggression, forcing her into a struggle that tested every ounce of her strength and willpower. Despite the danger, she fought with resilience and cunning, wriggling free and managing to convince him to give her a ride back toward the area where she had been picked up. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she navigated the situation with a careful balance of compliance and defiance, ultimately seizing an opportunity to escape as the vehicle neared a local gas station, disappearing into safety and drawing the attention of bystanders who quickly alerted the authorities. Within hours, the police had been informed of the assault, and for the first time, the investigation pivoted from theory and suspicion to actionable evidence. Officers quickly traced the incident back to Francois, recognizing him from the details provided by the survivor and corroborated by prior knowledge of his routines and vehicle. The timing of this report was critical. It coincided with the intensifying scrutiny on the missing women cases and offered law enforcement a concrete reason to confront Francois directly, moving from passive observation to active intervention. Detectives, armed with the survivor's testimony and long-established patterns, prepared to approach him with the gravity and precision that the situation demanded, aware that this confrontation could yield not only explanations for the recent assault, but potentially insights into the unresolved disappearances that had plagued the city for years. When Francois was summoned to the station, his demeanor remained outwardly calm and cooperative, yet beneath that placid exterior, the tension was palpable. Hours of questioning ensued, with investigators employing a combination of psychological strategy, patient persistence, and meticulous attention to detail, probing for inconsistencies and reactions that might indicate culpability. Over time, the cumulative pressure of these interviews, coupled with the inescapable weight of the survivor's account, began to erode his defenses. Gradually, in a series of measured admissions, Francois confessed to the murder of one of the missing women, a revelation that simultaneously shocked and relieved the detectives, providing them with the critical breakthrough they had long sought and finally shifting the investigation into a new, decisive phase. The confession was both horrifying and illuminating. It confirmed suspicions that had been festering for months, validating the painstaking surveillance, interviews, and analysis that law enforcement had pursued tirelessly. Each word revealed details that allowed the detectives to map the scope of his actions, understand his movements, and anticipate the locations where further evidence might be recovered. The impact on the investigative team was profound. The abstract fears and uncertainties that had dominated their work for nearly 2 years were replaced by a tangible path forward. A plan of action that could now be executed with confidence and precision. Simultaneously, the confession had a ripple effect on the families of the missing. While the confirmation of murder brought unimaginable grief, it also provided clarity, a grim resolution to the months of uncertainty and speculation. Relatives who had been haunted by unanswered questions now faced the reality of the situation with a mixture of sorrow and a renewed commitment to see justice served. The survivors, the detectives, and the broader community all became acutely aware that the breakthrough was not just a procedural success, but a turning point in the ongoing struggle to confront the darkness that had quietly existed within a seemingly ordinary neighborhood. From a law enforcement perspective, the events of that August day underscored the delicate interplay between vigilance, timing, and opportunity. It illustrated how the perseverance of investigators, combined with the courage of those who survived and reported crimes, could intersect to produce a decisive outcome even after months, or years, of stagnation. Each step taken by the police in monitoring, documenting, and building their understanding of Francois' patterns laid the groundwork for this pivotal moment, demonstrating that patient, methodical work could eventually overcome the obfuscations of someone who had meticulously hidden his actions behind a veneer of normalcy. In the aftermath, the investigation expanded rapidly. Search warrants were drawn, teams mobilized, and the focus shifted to the locations identified through the confession, with every detail meticulously documented and processed. For the first time, the detectives could enter spaces with purpose, guided by specific knowledge of what they might find, rather than relying solely on hunches, rumors, or circumstantial connections. Each room searched, each item documented, became a part of the unfolding narrative. A careful reconstruction of events that would ultimately reveal the extent of Francois' actions and provide the evidence necessary to bring formal charges and closure to a case that had gripped Poughkeepsie with fear and uncertainty for nearly 2 years. The courage of the survivor, in choosing to speak out and provide the critical testimony, served as a turning point not only in the investigation but in the broader understanding of the importance of vigilance, reporting, and community cooperation in uncovering hidden threats. It was a stark reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, individual action, combined with careful, diligent law enforcement work, could illuminate the path toward justice and resolution. And in this instance, it set into motion a sequence of events that would finally expose the horrifying truth hidden within a quiet suburban street, and bring a measure of closure to the families and the city that had long waited for answers. With Francois' confession providing a crucial key, law enforcement prepared for what would become one of the most harrowing chapters in Poughkeepsie's recent history, mobilizing a coordinated effort that drew detectives, crime scene specialists, EMS personnel, and supporting officers to 99 Fulton Avenue, the modest 2-story home that had, until that moment, masked an unspeakable horror. The house itself appeared unremarkable from the street, a green colonial nestled quietly among similar residences, its outward facade offering no hint of the darkness it concealed. Neighbors, accustomed to the normal rhythms of suburban life, had passed by this home countless times, unaware that within its walls lay the evidence of crimes that had terrorized the city for nearly 2 years. The morning air was cool and still as the first units arrived, the tension almost tangible, a mixture of anticipation, dread, and professional focus hanging over the scene like a heavy fog. Inside, the atmosphere was immediately oppressive. Detectives wearing protective suits and masks stepped cautiously into the cluttered, garbage-strewn rooms, their senses assaulted by the stench of decay and filth that had permeated every corner of the home. Furniture was buried beneath layers of refuse, Clothes were piled haphazardly across floors and counters, and the windows were shrouded by makeshift coverings that blocked out light, giving the interior a perpetual twilight, a grim echo of the lives that had ended within its walls. Each step was measured and deliberate, officers aware that every item, every detail, could provide evidence critical to understanding the full scope of Francois' actions. The house, in all its disarray, was a chilling reflection of the mind that had orchestrated these crimes. An environment both banal and grotesque, mundane in its structure yet extraordinary in the horrors it contained. As the search progressed, bodies were discovered in multiple locations, each revealing a layer of the grim narrative that had unfolded largely out of sight. 8 young women, varying in age and physical characteristics but sharing a similar vulnerability, were found in different states of decomposition, some recently deceased while others had been concealed long enough to attract insect and rodent activity, complicating the process of identification. The officers worked systematically, carefully documenting each finding, preserving the scene for forensic analysis while balancing the logistical and emotional weight of confronting such concentrated evidence of human tragedy. The gravity of the moment was palpable. The realization that a single individual had orchestrated such extensive and deliberate acts of violence within a home that appeared ordinary on the outside sent a ripple of shock through the entire investigative team. News of the discoveries quickly spread, drawing crowds of onlookers and media representatives to Fulton Avenue. Though the investigators remained focused on their work, methodically processing each area and extracting every piece of information that could aid in the case. Families of the missing began arriving, prepared for the worst yet still clinging to hope, and the emotional toll on them was immediate and visceral. The identification of the bodies, carried out over several days, confirmed the fears that had shadowed their lives for so long. Each discovery brought a mixture of grief, sorrow, and relief. The relief stemming only from the clarity of knowing what had happened, rather than the closure of justice or the comfort of answers. The painstaking process revealed not only the identities of those reported missing: Kina Newmaster, Gina Baron, Sandra French, Catherine Marsh, Wendy Myers, Kathleen Hurley, and Mary Jacob, but also the body of a woman, Audrey Pugliese, who had never been reported missing, raising new questions about the full extent of Francois' actions and the lives affected by his crimes. Throughout the search, detectives carefully reconstructed the sequence of events, noting the positioning of the bodies, the coverings and concealments used, and the environmental conditions that had contributed to the varying states of decomposition. Each detail became a piece of the larger puzzle, allowing investigators to piece together timelines, correlate confessions with physical evidence, and understand the patterns that had governed Francois' actions. This meticulous work illuminated not only the severity of the offenses but also the level of planning and control he exercised over his environment, demonstrating a disturbing awareness of concealment and the measures required to evade detection for so long. The impact on the investigative team was profound, not only professionally but psychologically. Officers and forensic specialists, while trained to handle difficult and distressing scenes, were confronted with the sheer concentration of loss and the stark reminder of the human cost behind statistics and case files. The scene at 99 Fulton Avenue became a focal point for understanding the necessity of persistence in investigations, the importance of following leads even when they seem unproductive, and the critical role that survivor reports and community cooperation can play in ultimately uncovering the truth. For the community and the families, the revelations brought a grim form of closure. While the knowledge of what had transpired could never undo the trauma, it confirmed suspicions, allowed for formal memorials, and enabled the judicial system to proceed with charges grounded in irrefutable evidence. The discovery of the bodies transformed a string of mysterious disappearances into a comprehensible, though horrifying, narrative. one that would become a defining chapter in the city's collective memory. It was a stark illustration of the depths to which one individual could manipulate appearances, evade suspicion, and exploit vulnerabilities. But it was also a testament to the perseverance of law enforcement, the bravery of survivors, and the importance of sustained investigative effort in bringing truth to light. In the weeks that followed, the scene at 99 Fulton Avenue continued to yield critical forensic evidence, each finding adding context, corroborating confessions, and enabling authorities to reconstruct a comprehensive understanding of Francois' methods and timeline. The work reinforced the intersection of meticulous investigative practice and human courage, illustrating how even in the most concealed and grotesque circumstances, patience, strategy, and vigilance can converge to reveal the truth, provide justice, and offer a measure of resolution to a community that had long been haunted by fear and uncertainty, ultimately exposing the chilling reality that had lurked unnoticed behind a familiar street and a seemingly ordinary home. As the grim investigation into Kendall Francois' crimes drew to a close, the city of Poughkeepsie was left to grapple with a mixture of relief, horror, and a somber reflection on the vulnerabilities that had allowed such tragedies to unfold unnoticed for so long. Francois, a man born and raised in the community he terrorized, had lived a life that outwardly appeared ordinary, even mundane. To neighbors, teachers, and casual acquaintances, he was just another face on the streets, a young man who went to school, worked sporadically, and lived at home with his parents and younger sister. The facade of normalcy he maintained was a striking reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even in close-knit communities, darkness can hide behind the most familiar of doors. Throughout the investigation, one of the most sobering realizations for law enforcement was the difficulty inherent in identifying and prosecuting such crimes when the victims were marginalized and often overlooked. Many of Francois' victims were young women with slight builds, some involved in sex work, others living transient lifestyles, and a number who had limited contact with family or friends. These circumstances made it far easier for their disappearances to go unnoticed or to be deprioritized. And the case underscored the critical importance of community awareness and responsiveness from authorities. It also highlighted the broader societal issues that contribute to vulnerability, including economic disparity, social stigma, and insufficient support for individuals who may be at higher risk of exploitation or violence. The painstaking efforts of the law enforcement teams, which involved multiple local and state police departments as well as federal agencies, demonstrated both the complexity and the necessity of thorough investigative work. Officers spent countless hours reviewing missing persons reports, conducting interviews, maintaining surveillance, and coordinating across jurisdictions to identify patterns that might lead to the perpetrator. Despite initial dead ends, misidentified suspects, and the absence of conventional crime scenes, persistence and methodical attention to detail ultimately led to Francois' arrest, confession, and the shocking discovery of 8 bodies in his home. This outcome, while horrifying, offered a measure of justice and clarity that allowed families and the community to begin the slow process of healing and reflection. Beyond the procedural elements of the investigation, the case of Kendall Francois served as a stark cautionary tale about the need for vigilance, empathy, and action in the face of potential threats. It demonstrated that criminal behavior often operates in plain sight, exploiting the assumptions and oversights of those around it. It also emphasized the vital role of survivors, witnesses, and even seemingly minor reports, such as the brave woman who survived an assault and reported Francois to authorities. In breaking the cycle of violence, without her courage and the dedication of law enforcement officers who followed up on her report, the full scale of Francois' crimes might have remained hidden indefinitely. The community response to the revelations was equally telling. As details emerged, the shock and grief of neighbors and families were mingled with an acknowledgement of the resilience required to confront such trauma. Vigils were held, memorials organized, and conversations began about the systemic vulnerabilities that had been exploited. In the courtroom, Francois faced charges for second-degree murder, assault, and other offenses, and while no punishment can truly restore what was lost, the legal proceedings provided a formal acknowledgement of the magnitude of his actions and the suffering inflicted. For viewers and learners outside of Poughkeepsie, the case provides multiple layers of insight. It illustrates the importance of community engagement, taking reports seriously regardless of a victim's social or economic status, and of maintaining rigorous investigative practices even in the absence of direct evidence. It serves as a reminder that danger often lurks where it is least expected, and that the most vulnerable individuals frequently require both vigilance and advocacy on the part of those around them. Equally, it emphasizes the human capacity for perseverance, as law enforcement and ordinary citizens alike work together to confront and eventually halt a sequence of crimes that threaten to remain unsolved. As we reflect on this dark chapter, it is also a call to action, to cultivate awareness, to protect the vulnerable, and to recognize that small acts of attentiveness, whether noticing a pattern, reporting suspicious behavior, or simply listening to those in danger, can prevent tragedies from multiplying. The story of Kendall Francois is a chilling testament to what can happen when society fails to see, to listen, and to act, but it is also a reminder of the courage, diligence, and moral responsibility that can eventually restore justice and safety. Thank you for joining us in exploring this complex and sobering story. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell so you never miss in-depth explorations of real-life cases and historical events. Your support helps us continue to produce detailed, respectful, and engaging content, and it ensures that stories like this reach audiences who can learn from them, reflect on them, and act with awareness in their own communities. Remember, understanding the past can help protect the future, and your engagement makes a difference. So hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insightful stories that reveal not just the mysteries of human behavior, but also the lessons we can carry forward in our daily lives.